By the end of this campaign, we're going to know an awful lot about the presidential candidates' private lives. Already, look what we've learned. From Michelle Obama, we've learned that Barack Obama snores during the night and that when he wakes up in the morning, like many of us, he has bad breath. From Elizabeth Edwards, we learned that when she and John Edwards have sex, it sometimes gets pretty rough. And that one time, her ribs actually hurt in the morning. Don't know if they had to go off to the hospital or not. Mrs. Giuliani told us that he is a high testosterone kind of guy. Don't want to go there. And about Mitt Romney, well, we learned that he's a Boy Scout, but there was this weird vacation that he and the family took to New Hampshire one time. They strapped their dog on the roof of a car. Now, the dog was in a box and everything, but the whole thing was kind of weird. So the question is, this is all kind of interesting. Why do we wind up talking about this? Why? Because it doesn't take a PhD to understand these kinds of stories. They're not boring. They're interesting. And what the American people want to talk about during presidential campaigns is what's interesting. And it's been that way ever since the 1830s, once the masses got the vote. That's the defining time period in American history. Before then, presidential campaigns, they were nasty, they were often ugly, but mostly they were about issues. Once the masses got the vote, all kinds of extraneous matters became important, including the personal lives of the presidents. That's why we talk about these things, because the American people are interested in them. And that's why you see pictures of, like I did last night, Barack Obama playing pool. What has that got to do with being president? But it's because the masses can identify with it. They can understand that. That's why Hillary, in the Pennsylvania race, she belted back a scotch. That's because that makes her human. And that's something, again, that we can all relate to. So that's what presidential politics is often about. It's not about the health care plan that presidential candidate A has and all the various provisions and what it's going to do and who it's going to cover and how much it's going to cost and how we're going to pay for it. No, instead, it's all about the human details of these presidential candidates. It's about their personality. It's about their character. The question is that good enough? Does that give the people the information that they need to make a reasonable, rational choice when they go into the voting booth in November? Well, let's see.
On human rights.
Watching TV, you think you know who the candidates are because you can see them. But do you really know who they are? In 1960, Americans thought that John Kennedy was an all-American family man. They saw those pictures of him playing touch football with his family on the green lawn outside Hyannisport. Turned out, well, he was a cheater. He was a womanizer. He was cheating on Jackie during the whole time of their marriage. And in fact, one of his girlfriends happened to be the girlfriend of a mafia thug. Or take Jimmy Carter in 1976. Americans fell in love with his telegenic smile. Turned out, though, he wasn't much of a leader. He was a micromanager. He got in over his head in details, and he couldn't see the big picture. And his policies were in conflict with one another. At the end, I think historians have concluded that he was a failed president. Or take more recently George W. Bush in 2000. He sure looked like the kind of guy you could kick back and have a beer with at a barbecue. But he wasn't much of a leader either. It turns out voters actually need to dig a little deeper. They need to know something if they're going to make an informed decision. I'll tell you what, the little secret of American politics is the voters just don't know much. Only 2 in 5 Americans know that we have 3 branches of government and can name them: the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. Only 1 out of 5 know that we have 100 U.S. senators, even though we've had 100 U.S. senators for more than half a century, ever since Alaska and Hawaii came into the Union. And it's a nice, easy, round number. Easy to remember. Finally, only 1 out of 7 Americans, 5 years into the war with Iraq, can locate Iraq on a map. The optimists say, oh, the voters are smart enough. And they point to the shortcuts voters use to make up for their lack of information. For instance, a voter who hasn't been following an election very closely may turn to a friend who has and say, hey, who you're going to vote for? Or they may turn to a newspaper whose opinions they trust and look to see who the editors are backing. In addition, they understand failure and success. When times are good, they reward the party that's in power. and the candidates of that party. When times are bad, they punish those people who are in power by throwing them out of office. Great, right? Everything's great. Wrong.
Take the Iraq War. All the shortcuts in the world didn't help the voters understand that the Bush-Cheney administration had played them like a fiddle. The voters made three classic errors. Number one, they came to believe that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11 even though he wasn't. And why did they believe this? Of course, because of all the dropped hints of the Bush-Cheney officials. But when the 9/11 Commission reported that Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11, the people apparently didn't believe it, or they didn't pay attention, or something, because they continued to insist that he did. This was an important misunderstanding because a majority of Americans believed that if Saddam didn't have anything to do with 9/11, they would have opposed the invasion of his country. Number two, let's talk about WMD. The Bush-Cheney administration, of course, left the false impression that Saddam had WMD. Maybe sincerely, maybe not. But here's the point. The voters believed it even after the 9/11 Commission said that there was no proof, even after Richard Clark, even after the UN, even after David Kay said there was no proof that Saddam had WMD. In fact, we had spent $1 billion trying to find them and we couldn't find them. People didn't care about the facts. Number three, on the eve of the invasion of Iraq, only 1/3 of Americans understood that the world opposed the invasion. Another third believed that the rest of the world was neutral, and still another third thought the rest of the world loved the idea of the invasion and supported it. All of this leads me to ask if the voters cannot get something of the magnitude of 9/11 in Iraq right. In other words, if they can't get the basic facts right about something this important, how can we believe that they can get much of anything right about all the other issues that face them, that aren't on the front pages of the paper every single day?
Are the American people stupid? I think that would be as stupid as saying that the people are smart, which politicians love to say all the time, which is really kind of stupid. But I do think we have to have the courage to point out the truth about the people's shortcomings. It's time that we break that taboo. I'm Rick Shenkman, the author of Just How Stupid Are We? Facing the Truth About the American Voter.